Okay, so I wanted to go ahead and start with a little bit of a review. We did last week Romans chapter 8, part 1, but we only made it through the first 4 verses. So I wanted to just go ahead and read those again just quickly, just to get the flavor of them again before we continue on through 5 and on. So I'll go ahead and read that for you. Romans chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, and I have the King James, so forgive my Old English. But there is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus hath made me free from the law of sin and death. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God sending his own Son, in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. Okay. Just quick review there. Reminder here, so we can start off on the right page. The first verse says there's no condemnation for who?
Those who are in Christ.
Who are in Christ Jesus.
Those who are in Christ. And it uses the word who twice. What is the other who that it says?
Not after the who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit.
Okay. So they walk not after the flesh, but they do walk after the Spirit. And Paul is using concrete terms, so we know that he's not just not being spiritual and just abstract. He says, you walk. What are you actually doing? What matters is how you're living your life. That determines whether or not you are in Christ or not. And for those people, there's no condemnation. Okay? Now, just some more clarification on what it means to be in Christ. Compare this verse, because that's a lot of people, well, what does it mean to be in Christ? The Bible actually defines it. So go to 1 John chapter 3, verse 6 and 7. 1 John chapter 3, verse 6 and 7. And this is a chapter that gives a couple definitions. Just a few verses earlier, it gives a definition of sin. In verse 4, it says, whosoever committeth sin transgresses also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. And that's pretty much the clearest definition of sin we have in the Bible. It's breaking God's law.
What verse?
And now we're on 6 through 7. And so now he gives you a definition of what it means to be in Christ. I'll go ahead and read this from the King James again. It says, whosoever abideth in him sinneth not. Whosoever sinneth hath neither seen him nor known him. Then he adds this thought, little children, let no man deceive you. He that doeth righteousness is righteous, even as he is righteous. So John gives this concept of those who are in Christ are those who are not sinning. Now, when Jesus walked on this earth, did he sin? No. So then it makes a lot of sense to say that when you are in Christ, you're following him. And you're not sinning at that moment. This is a moment-by-moment decision. I'm not talking about some kind of thing where you get put in some package when you're converted and then you never sin again for the rest of your life. No. We have a moment-by-moment choice. But the definition, if you want to know, well, am I in Christ or am I not? The question is, are you in known sin? And if you're in known sin, you can't be in Christ at the same time. And so this helps us to keep us from deceiving ourselves. Okay? And the reason why is in verse 7, because he says right after that, let no man deceive you. Now, if John says right after this, let no man deceive you, it's because there is going to be a deception on this topic. Does that make sense? There's going to be a deception on what it means to be in Christ. And so immediately he says, let no man deceive you. And he makes it again very concrete, very reality. He that doeth righteousness is righteous, even as he is righteous. Good morning. So it's not he doesn't talk about any kind of abstract, outside of you type of stuff. He's what are you doing? Again, Paul, are you walking after the flesh or after the spirit? You know? He who doeth righteousness is righteous, even as he is righteous. And so, and again, this is not something you can earn. It's not something you can do in your own strength. And it's not something that I'm saying that, it happens once and then you're good for the rest of your life. You're never going to sin again. No, you still have free will. You can still choose to go away from God any moment. But, just to be clear, those who abideth in him sinneth not. Now, the word for sinneth there, it's present tense. And so it's, what are you doing right now? Right now. That's the question. And that's all you have to worry about. You don't need to worry about tomorrow. You don't need to worry about an hour from now. You need to be, Jesus says, sufficient for the day are the evils thereof. So just today, this moment, have you submitted to God everything that he has asked, that you know? And placed your faith that he can keep you from falling. And that's all he asks, moment by moment.
So John is connected and saying, he who abides in him, but Jesus in John 54 says, abide in me.
Absolutely. And you will bear much fruit, which is good works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so that was just a little bit of background. Now I want to look at two categories that are mentioned here in verses 5 through 9. Two categories. And this is obviously the saved versus the lost. Being in Christ versus being in the flesh versus being in the spirit. So let's read 5 through 9. And we'll kind of put the verses, even part of the verses, on two parts. We have to be in the flesh or in the spirit. Verse 5. For they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the spirit, the things of the spirit. So in verse 5, part A, he's talking about those who are in the flesh. Part B, second part of the verse, those who are in the spirit. And he tells you, do you mind or do you go after the things of the flesh or do you go after the things of the spirit? Verse 6.
I think I like the New King James
Go
because
ahead.
it makes it personal. It says when we were in the flesh. And that one says when they were, right? What does it say there?
For they that are.
Yeah, for they.
It's more of a question of just defining the abstracts.
Yeah. But it makes it personal. It's like we're the one.
When we were.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
when we were.
For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. So again, the first part of 6a and the second part, 6b. So he's going back and forth. To be carnally minded is death. It will lead to death. But to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Verse 7, because the carnal mind is enmity against God, enemy against God. For it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. So all of verse 7 is on this side, being in the flesh. Carnally minded. And those who are carnally minded cannot be subject to the law of God. Verse 8, so then they that are in the flesh cannot please God. Can't do it. Even if they want to, they can't do it. Okay? Verse 8. Verse 9, but you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit. If so be the Spirit of God dwells in you. Now if any man have not the Spirit of Christ, he is none of his. So now we see, we're going over to verse 9, and he says, you're not like those people who are carnally minded and can't please God. You are not in the flesh, you're in the Spirit, if the Spirit of Christ is dwelling in you. And then he says, now if any man have not the Spirit of Christ, he is none of his. He's very clear. If you don't have the Spirit of Christ, you don't belong to Christ. So that he's going back. On the second half of verse 9, he goes back. So you see how he's just going back and forth and defining. He's making it clear there's two sides. At any moment, you could be on either side, like Hosea. And people don't like this. They don't like this idea. They want eternal security. I'm saved and I'm good forever. Once saved, always saved. The Bible just does not give that impression. It's clear that you can always make a choice. That's why Paul says, I beat down my body lest by any means I should be a castaway. There's always, you always have a choice. And the Bible just doesn't present this idea of eternal security. Security in Christ. And you can be sure in Christ and have faith that he can keep you, but he never takes your free will away. Never. Okay? So now let's look at verse 10. And I want to ask in verse 10, what does the word dead mean? Can somebody read verse 10 for us, please?
But if Christ is in you, your body is dead because of sin, yet your spirit is alive because of righteousness.
Okay. So now keep in mind the previous verse he had just said, you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if the Spirit of Christ dwells in you. But if the Spirit of Christ doesn't dwell in you, then you're not his. And then he tells you, he clarifies what this means to have the Spirit of Christ in you. But if the Spirit of him that, now if Christ be in you, here's what it means to have Christ in you. The body is dead because of sin, but the Spirit is life because of righteousness. What does he mean the body is dead? Are you physically dead? What do you think that means? The body is dead. Any ideas?
It means you're dead in sin.
What do you mean? Explain.
Because if we follow our carnal flesh, we are sinful. We are not walking in the Spirit.
Well, that's when you are in. That's when you're actually in the flesh.
Yes.
But this verse is talking about what it means to be in the Spirit.
Okay.
So at the beginning he said, but if Christ be in you, so Christ is in you.
Yeah.
The body is dead
It's
because of sin, but the Spirit is life because of righteousness. What does that mean?
newness of life.
Newness of life. Okay? So what does it mean that the body is dead? You're not physically dead. When
No.
Christ is in you, the body is dead. What does that mean?
Last,
Born again.
yeah, when we have lust and temptations and everything, they are in the body. Our senses, basically. And if we have Christ, we're not going to respond to the body. It's like the body's dead. So no longer, yeah.
So you ignoring the lust of the flesh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then person doesn't do anything, doesn't steal, doesn't lie, basically.
Okay. I have a verse that backs up that idea. Go to verse 13.
Romans 8.
Yeah, same one. For if you live after the flesh, you shall die. But if you through the Spirit do mortify or put to death the deeds of the body,
You will live.
you shall live.
The actions, the deeds are the actions too.
So the body, you put to death its actions.
Mhm.
So there's two kinds of death. The other one dies later, but this one dies
Now,
or now.
today.
So you die now, you live later. You live now, you die later.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. If you let your flesh do whatever it wants and it's alive today,
Yeah.
then at the end of judgment, you're going to die. But if you today put to death the deeds of the flesh, then you will live. The body's already dead.
Analogy.
Fantastic.
Good way, Michael.
Exactly it.
Yeah.
Let's look at another verse that clarifies this, what it means for the body to be dead, but the Spirit is life. Go back to Romans chapter 7, verse 9. So we're looking in the context, just the previous chapter. Now, Romans 8, just to remind you guys, Romans 8 is a summary of what we've discussed for the last 4 chapters. And so he's throwing these terms out, like the body is dead, the Spirit is life, and you have to bring together what he's already said in the previous chapters to understand what he's saying. So Romans chapter 7, verse 9, He says, "For I was alive without the law once, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died." The idea there is what is alive is what's in charge. Before the law came, I was alive. I was doing my own thing. Then the commandment came, and I realized the sin that I didn't even realize before, and I tried to obey God, and sin revived in me, and I died. Sin was alive, and I'm dead, and so now sin's in charge. Correct.
I like the analogy of Paul, I think later on, he says, like, the law is like a mirror. It's kind of like in the mirror, before you went to the mirror, you didn't know that you had specks in your eyes,
Yes.
but then you went to the mirror and like, oh, they have something in my face.
Yes.
Remote.
He thought he was okay before
He was
he
okay.
realized the commandment.
But then he can't do anything about it because it's just a mirror.
Absolutely. The law can show you, but it cannot fix the problem. So, whatever is alive is in charge, and whatever is dead is not in charge. So go back to Romans 8, verse 10. The body is dead. The body's not in charge anymore. You're putting to death the deeds of the flesh. The body's not in charge, putting to death. But the spirit is alive. So who's in charge? The spirit. Right? It's very simple. It's just a simple object lesson. If Christ is in you, this is what's going on. The body is dead, the spirit's alive. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see here. Now let's read verse 11. What does it mean that God shall also quicken your mortal bodies, or bring to life your mortal bodies, by his Spirit that dwelleth in you? Somebody read verse 11 for us, please.
And if the Christ of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies, through his Spirit who lives in you.
Okay, thank you. So he's saying the same power of God that brought Jesus up from physical death will also quicken or make alive your mortal bodies to serve God. Now, he's being very concrete. We're not talking about some abstract thing outside of you. He's saying your mortal body will be brought to life. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You're actually going to walk after the Spirit, not after the flesh. And so what does it mean that he's going to bring you to life by the Spirit? What do you guys think that means? Should be clear by now. What does it mean that he's going to bring you to life by his Spirit?
Resurrect you, right?
Resurrect, but what does that mean, practically speaking?
Newness of life.
Newness of life.
I think this is the born again that you were talking about.
Born again.
That's what it means,
Absolutely.
because then the body is not going to go that way. It's going to follow the Spirit.
That's what it means to be born again.
Yeah.
Is it the same as in Romans 6:5 or
Which one?
6:4?
Which one?
It says, "Therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death,
Yeah.
that like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life."
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So-
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So we know that baptism is a symbol of that,
Yes.
the newness of life
The old man
Yes.
dies
and newness.
and a new life.
But then we say we do this every day. It's a daily thing.
Absolutely. Paul
So-
says, I die
Daily.
daily. So you must be
Baptized, you must be
born
baptized
again
every
daily.
day.
Right.
Well, spiritually.
Spiritually.
You need to be water baptism once, but you need to be baptized in the Spirit. You need to have a newness of the Spirit every day. Absolutely.
So then,
That's why you're supposed to pray for the Spirit,
So then I have
not
another
just once,
question.
but all over.
Then you would ask every day for Christ to baptize you with His Spirit. every day.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's not a one-time thing. This idea that being born again is a one-time experience that happens, it's
No.
not biblical at all.
It's daily.
That Paul is very clear in Romans chapter 6, which you brought up, that to be born again means the old man dies and now you're living in Christ. That's not a, I don't know about you guys, but that's not a one-time thing for me. That needs to happen every day. And so Paul says, I die daily. And so you need to be born again daily. He also says in Galatians, to prove this, because a lot of Christians don't like this idea of being born again daily. They don't like this idea. But he says in Galatians, to those believers who were in Christ, but then they fell away and they got into legalism, he says that my little children, I travail in birth until Christ be formed in you again. And so Jesus needed to be born in, and he says, I travail in birth, like he's a pregnant woman, right? Until Jesus is born in you. So you need to be born, and then he says again, it needs to happen again. So absolutely, it's something that needs to happen more than once. Okay, and just the definition of what it means to be, for the flesh to die and you to live, it simply, are you walking after the flesh or are you walking after the Spirit? Well, we make mistakes all the time. And so you have to continually put the old man to death and follow after the Spirit again, over and over again, by faith, not by your own strength. And these things don't earn you salvation, but they show you whether or not you are abiding in Him. That's the key. Okay? So let's read verses 12 through 15 here. 12 through 14. And I'm just going to kind of ask you guys for commentary on it, because this stuff should be reviewed by now, after going through these last few chapters. So verse 12. Somebody read verse 12 for us.
Therefore, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live after the flesh.
What do you guys think that means? Or does it even need any explanation? What do you-
You don't owe anything to the flesh.
Absolutely. And then, so you shouldn't live according to what it's saying.
You're not saying, I should think I should live this way because I owe you. But you don't
Well,
owe anything.
The previous chapter he was talking about slavery, right?
Right.
So we're not, again, it's this concept, you're not in debt to the flesh. You're not a slave to the flesh. Okay, verse 13.
For if ye live after the flesh, ye shall die. But if ye through the Spirit do mortify the deeds of the body, ye shall live.
Very clear, right? Who's going to live and who's going to die? Well, if you live after the flesh, you're going to die. But if you live after the Spirit, if you put to death the deeds of the flesh, and he said they both have to happen. It's not enough to, well, I do good stuff. You know, I do good godly stuff. But I still have all these sins in my life. No, you got to do both. You got to put to death the deeds of the flesh and follow after the Spirit. That's the whole point. And if you do that, you will live. That's conditional. There's a condition, right?
Do this, you get that.
Yeah. But doing this does not earn you that. And that's the confusion.
It's a consequence. That's all it is.
It's a consequence.
It's the outcome of
Let me
doing
give you
this.
guys an example, because a lot of people get hung up on this. No, that's works salvation because there's a condition. There's conditions throughout the entire Bible. Jesus is very clear. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will into the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father. So he laid out the condition. You got to do God's will, or you're not going to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's very clear. But doing his will does not earn you. So there's a difference between a condition, horrible handwriting. There's a difference between a condition versus earning something. Enjoy this. So, a condition. Let me give you guys an object lesson. Let's say somebody gives you a check for $1 million, right? Gift. I don't know about you guys, but at my current wages, it would take me a very long time to earn $1 million, right? I don't know about you guys. But, so somebody just gives you a check for $1 million. Now, in order for you to avail yourself of that money, what do you have to do? Do you just walk around with the check everywhere you go?
Oh, cash it.
What do you got? Yeah, you got to cash it, right?
Yeah, cash it. Yeah.
You have to put put it into your bank account. There's a condition in order to actually access the funds. You have to put it in your bank account, sign, show your ID. They're going to make sure it's real because of $1 million check. There's conditions. You going to the bank and depositing that check into the bank, did that earn you the $1 million? That would be ridiculous to say that.
It was given to you.
It was a gift. The condition was you just have to apply it to your account.
Accepted it. Yeah.
You just have to accept the gift, yeah. And so a condition is not the same as earning it. And it would be ridiculous for somebody to walk around and say, man, do you see what a good job I did? I signed the back of that check and deposited in, I earned that $1 million. That would be ridiculous, right? And that's what people think when they start thinking, oh, well, for you to live this new life in Christ, and that's a condition for salvation. Oh, you're earning salvation. No. Not if you're accepting it as a gift. If you try to do it in your own strength, then yes. But if you accept it as a gift and by faith, that's not earning it. Not at all. Not at all.
It's a gift.
It's a gift. Give you another example. You go to a guy who goes to the moon in a rocket ship, right? The astronaut, they get into the machine, and there's this big giant tank of gas on the side, right? You've seen those, or there's like multiple of them. There's one to get you up, and then one to get you farther, and all that. And the thing that has the power to get you to the moon is that machine with the gas in it, right? Whatever that jet fuel or whatever it is, high-powered fuel in it. But the astronaut has to actually get in to the spaceship, right? He has to get in, has to put his seatbelt on, right? Or he's not going anywhere, right? That fuel's not going to take him by himself if he doesn't get in, right? But would he say, well, I took myself to the moon because I put my seatbelt on, therefore I did it myself? No, of course not. That's ridiculous. Again, the power of God is the one that gets it done. But you must consent. You must agree to it, and you must believe that he can actually do it. And so by faith you accept the gift. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. So we're not talking about earning salvation, and Paul's not talking about earning it either.
No
but it's
merits.
very clear, those who are in Christ versus those who aren't. Okay. Let's see. Verse 14. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. So it's very clear at the end of it. Who are the sons of God? Not just anyone who says they are, but those who are led by the Spirit of God. Absolutely. Now, we don't have a lot of time to go into, there's a couple other things that I just wanted to say really quickly. You guys may have, in your own time, you can read verses 28 through 30. And some people will use these verses to speak of predestination. Forgive my handwriting. Predestination. I don't have a lot of time to go into it, but I'll just point out one thing here. In verse 28 he says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose, from whom he did foreknow, he did also predestine to be conformed to the image of his Son. And it goes through and talks about the different steps. Moreover, those who he predestined, then he called, and he justified, and whom he justified, he also glorified. And so people will say, well, this is God just deciding who's going to be saved. He predestined.
No way. It
No
is
way.
clear in the they have to read the context very well.
Read the context, absolutely. Absolutely. And notice what is mentioned first in order. That's what I want you to notice. Verse 29, it says, for whom he did foreknow. Foreknowledge. God knew who is going to accept the gift, who is going to believe. And our Calvinist brethren will have a problem with the idea of God saving those based on foreseen faith, because they say, well, that means that your faith earns you salvation. Problem is, nowhere in the entire Bible does Paul ever, or anywhere in the Bible, does it say that faith is a work that earns salvation. Paul puts the two on different sides. There's faith on one side, works on the other side. Faith is not works. And so for them to say, well, foreseeing faith is a work that earns you salvation, that's just not biblical. And it's taking Paul's words to such an extreme that you're making faith into a work. And that's not biblical. All this is saying is God knew who would accept the gift by faith, and then he saved. It's not describing God picking and choosing who's going to be saved. It's God saying, okay, when you believe and you accept the gift, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to conform you to the image of Jesus. So that's very quickly on that. And then 35 through 39, some people will use that passage to speak of once saved, always saved. It's the one that says what can get in between us and God, basically, and it lists all these things. None of these things are going to keep us from the love of God. But the passage says nothing about ourselves. You can choose to not follow God. And in fact, the previous part that we've been discussing in Romans 8 says, hey, if you do this, if you live after the flesh, you're going to die. So it's totally ignoring what Paul previously said in the rest of the chapter.
So the meaning of the predestined on the 30th verse, it says here,
It just means to determine something.
to predestinate or predetermine. It means to say that we are justified by faith. Jesus Christ died for us to save humanity from sinfulness. But we are just justified. But it doesn't mean you are saved already if you don't believe.
It's basically like if you set up conditions for something, you say, hey, if you meet these conditions, this is what I'm going to do. And the condition is very simple. It's you don't have to be circumcised. You don't have to try and earn you accept the gift by faith. That's the condition, right? And so there's no works, there's no boasting involved. You just accept it by faith. And so he foreknew it, and he determined beforehand that those who would accept the gifts by faith, he would do this for them. He would change them, and etc.
So that's the meaning of predestined.
It's just something that God, he predetermined what he would do in response to
For those who
accepting.
accept the gift.
Exactly. By faith.
By faith.
Not by works, not by circumcision or any kind of outward keeping of the law, simply by faith. Yeah. And the only argument you can bring against that is to say that you don't like the idea of God rewarding foreseen faith in his promises. But that destroys the basis of trusting God's promises. Because now, the promises are not for everyone. You can never be sure if the promises are for you. Because maybe he didn't determine you to believe, to accept these promises. But the promises are sure for anyone who accepts them. And so, it may take you a second to wrap your mind around that, but it destroys the basis for accepting the promises of God. And that's the only basis of our faith. We have to trust the promises of God. Absolutely. Hopefully that's clear. Does anyone have any other questions? We're a little over on time. Is that clear?
Good.
Okay. Good. We made it through Romans 8, and we'll study Romans 9 next week, which actually not that hard of a chapter. All right. Somebody want to say a prayer for us? Anybody volunteer?
I pray.
Thank you.
Lord,